Okay. Sometimes it takes longer to load, and I'm not sure, like if it's going live. Okay, now I think it's live. So we're beginning a new chapter in Tanya today. We're also beginning sort of a new series, a new section. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but we'll start with I don't know how to ask this question properly, but so you forgive me if it doesn't come across. How would you identify? We'll talk males for now because it's easier to identify. How would you identify a religious Jew, a male religious Jew?
Practicing Jew, doesn't, follows the.
So if you're walking down the street and the guy tells you, "Oh, he's Jewish," and you wanted to size him up and see without asking any questions, or you didn't even see him, you saw him walking on the other side of the street, you could tell he's Jewish. What would tell you, or how would you judge him if he's religious or not?
His Yamokian and probably has tzitzis.
Okay, so I think most people would say a kippah because tzitzit, first of all, you can't always see it. Not everyone wears it out. For some reason, people identify a kippah with being a religious Jew, which is not necessarily factually true, right? First of all, could be religious Jews that for whatever reason don't go outside with a kippah. And there could be non-religious Jews that wear kippahs. But for some reason, we identify, so there must be something there. Okay. So we're not going to talk about the kippah, but we're going to talk about what the kippah represents, and then maybe we'll understand why we put so much weight in the kippah. But first, last week we mentioned, as we summarized the last 5 chapters or 6 chapters, that we reminded ourselves of the opening verse in the verse in the introduction in the how do you call it? The front page of the Tanya, what the purpose of the Tanya is coming to explain. And it's coming to explain one verse, right? It says, Ki karov elecha hadavar ma'od. This thing, what thing? The Torah. These 5 books, this is literally the last day of Moses' life. When he's telling the Jewish people, there's this thing that I'm telling you today, this Torah that I'm giving you, karov elecha, it's close to you, which means it's accessible to you. Ma'od, very accessible. Beficha, in your mouth. Bilvavcha, in your heart. La'asosa, to do it. In other words, if a Jew comes and says, I'm 70 years old already. My whole life I didn't even know about any of this. I can't do all of this. Moshe says, no, there's no such thing. This Torah is very accessible. Doesn't say very easy, very accessible to be kept in your heart, in your mouth, and in action. Thought, speech, and action. And when any person reads this verse in the Torah, what's the obvious mental block that comes up? It doesn't feel very accessible. I can tell you how many days I woke up and it didn't feel so accessible to do everything God wanted me to do that day. So how is it so accessible? And not just action. Action, okay, you could convince me that action-based mitzvahs are accessible. To love God, that's it. Love God, that's easy to do. Easy, even accessible. How can I do that? I haven't even thought about God in 70 years. Well, suddenly I'm going to start loving him? I don't even know who he is. So the Alter Rebbe, and this is really what most people struggle with. Most religious Jews, but specifically the Alter Rebbe's deal is remember, the Alter Rebbe is replacing a private audience with a Tanya. He says, remember in the introduction, he says he doesn't have time to meet everyone privately and help everyone with their answer their questions privately. There's just not enough time. There are so many new Hasidim coming. There was not enough time. So he's writing a book. The Alter Rebbe says, I know all of you. I know all your questions. And this book will have the answer to any question you will ever have. And if you can't find it, go to the elders in your city. They will help you find it. And to them, I say, don't make yourself more humble than you really are. Answer the questions that come to you. And for 7 generations, that's what we've been doing. So the Alter Rebbe is trying to make the person who feels very distant from God, feels very distant from even the religious person that does the routine. But in his feelings and even in action, sometimes it's difficult to overcome the evil inclination. Now, Alter Rebbe is going to teach us how to do it, how to make this, how to penetrate our heart and our mind, etc. Yeah.
But one of the things is I really had gotten away from
Okay,
Judaism.
let's leave that. Write it down. Let's leave it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I don't want to derail the thought
Okay.
processing. Okay. So the last couple chapters that we learned, we dealt with a conflict between your heart and to do it. Which one's primary, right? Because you can't focus on both at the same time necessarily. Which one's more important? Which one is primary? So we came to the conclusion that action is more primary, but your heart is very necessary because those are the wings that help it soar to the heavens, right? Those were the emotions, the kavana, the intention with which you did a mitzvah. Yeah. And we said also that in the Torah, there are not only action-based mitzvahs, there's also heart-based mitzvahs, right? Like the mitzvah to love God. The Shema, we say, V'ahavta, love the Lord your God. That's a mitzvah to love. Now, Jay is takes a lot of lessons and talks a lot about Shar HaBitachon, the gate of trust. It's one of many gates in a book called Chovat HaLevavot, Duties of the Heart. And this book basically goes through the mitzvahs and that are dependent on not just doing something physically. Okay? But he asks the question there, why is it that most of Jewish literature, starting from the Torah, all the way to the Talmud, the Mishnah, and even the contemporary works, almost universally deal with action-based mitzvahs? If you open the code of Jewish law, you won't find much of the mitzvah to love God or to fear God. It doesn't say how to do it, when to do it. What do I do? How do I do that? None of not none, but most halachic works don't cover the mitzvahs of the heart. Why is it? So he explains, he says, because a practical, actionable mitzvah is, first of all, simple to describe, and it's simple to do. Sometimes it can be a little expensive, but it's okay. So you have to save up $1,000 to buy a pair of tefillin, but at least you know what you have to do. Once you get the pair of tefillin, you have to put them on. You know how to put them on. It's easy to describe in a book. It's easy to convey to a person. But when it comes to feelings, how do you describe that? How do you? So now that we know we finished the last section by saying that although the mitzvahs, action of the mitzvahs, that's primary. But if you want the mitzvahs to go up and accomplish something, you need to have kavanah. You need to have intention and emotions. Okay, so now the Alter Rebbe is going to address the question: what does it mean to have emotions? How do I get those emotions? Okay, so for the next, I would say from where we're up to chapter 41 through probably chapter 45 or so, 46, we're going to discuss the different types of emotions, primarily three: chesed, gevura, and tiferes, which is love or a feeling of being close, being drawn close to someone, awe. It's not a distance, but it's sort of respect. And, I want a connection to the person, but from a distance. I don't want to come close, but I also don't want to get pushed away. I want to be under this person's protection. I want to be in this person's thought, but I don't want him to look at me because I don't want him to see my shameful face. But it's still a bond and a connection, but it's a connection of awe. Okay? And then there's sort of beauty is sort of a combination of the two. We'll see as the chapters progress how that plays out.
On the 10 Sfirot, are those Gevura and
Chesed is on the right, Gevura is on the left, and Tiferes is in the middle.
They connect in the middle.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so now let's start with love and fear. Well, I'm going to call it fear because that's the Hebrew. It's Ava and Yira. But when we say fear, we'll explain in the coming chapters there are many different types of fear. the most basic fear of God that there is not really fear of God.
Awe.
No, before awe.
Reverence.
No, fear of punishment.
Huh?
But it's not really fear of God, it's fear of me. I'm worried about the consequences God will give me, but I'm worried for myself. Okay? This is how you start educating a child. The first thing you educate child is, if you do this, you'll get a candy. If you don't do this, you're going to be grounded, right? Because first you have to make sure the kid does what they're supposed to do. Once they do what they're supposed to do, then you could raise the level a bit and say, okay, now don't do it because I told you to. Do it because you understand why you should do it on your own, right? But you can only tell a child to do that once they're already trained to do it. How do you train a child to do it? Consequences for the good or for the bad. So the most basic level of fear is fear of punishment, but the Alter Rebbe is not really talking about that in Tanya, because really that's not fear of God. That's fear of God's wrath on me, but it's really, I'm worried for my own flesh and bones or my own soul, okay? So what's the next best, well, what's the lowest level of fear of heaven? So there's fear of heaven, which could mean, as we'll soon see, many different things. Then there's love, which also could mean many different things, okay? But which one comes first? Now, love draws you close to the person. So the 248 positive mitzvahs are a result of love. Now, obviously, you may do one of the mitzvahs just because you made on Simchas Torah, you said you're going to do it, so you do it. Or your spouse wants you to do it, or your child wants you, or your father wants you to do it, so you do it. But if you're doing the mitzvah with feeling, what pushes you to do a positive mitzvah? Love. I want to be closer to God. What stops me from committing a sin? Not love necessarily. Fear, right? Fear of disconnect. Because if the person loves me so much, they won't care if I do a sin. So what stops me from doing the sin? The fact that I know I don't want to disappoint them. Or I don't want them to ignore my phone call. Or I don't want them to take away my allowance, right? I don't want to disappoint them. That's fear. So the root cause of all negative commandments is fear of heaven. The root cause of all positive commandments is awe of heaven, is love of heaven. Love of God. So which one comes first? When you're starting off your journey, whether you're becoming, you don't observe the mitzvahs and you want to start observing the mitzvahs, or you're an observant Jew and you want to deepen your relationship, you want to serve God. Serve God doesn't mean doing mitzvahs. If you're just doing it as like a robot, that's not serving God. Serving God means you're investing your emotions. You're getting thoughtful about it. So where do we start from? Love or fear? Probably love. Why probably love?
I think it's more of positive emotion.
Oh, it's more positive. It's more attractive. You would think that if we start with love, eventually we'll get to fear, right? We'll get to the more you love something, the more you realize how great it is, the more fearful you are of disconnecting from it. So the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us, no, not so fast. Alter Rebbe is going to tell us that although there are different levels of love and fear, and therefore when we get to the higher levels, love might come first. But if you're starting on ground level and you're starting your way up, the first and most important thing is at least the most basic level of fear of heaven. And the term that is usually used for this basic level is Kabbalat Ol. Have you ever heard of the word Kabbalat Ol? Ol is a yoke. You know what a yoke is?
Yeah, like an ox.
Oh, not an egg yolk, right? Yeah. So receiving a yoke, that is the most basic level of fear of God. In other words, I've got a boss. What's a yoke? The ox is grazing, it's eating, it's sleeping. What happens when the yoke goes around the ox's neck?
Does it work?
It's not time to do work. It's time to do what the boss tells me to do and not what I want to do. So if you want to focus on love, today you may be in the mood. What happens if tomorrow you're not in the mood of focusing on loving God? You're not going to. So therefore, in order to have a baseline, you have to accept the yoke of God. Because when you have the yoke of God on your neck, then when you wake up in the morning and you're not in the mood of working on your love, it doesn't matter because you have a yoke. So even though what Earl said makes sense, you would think it makes more sense to start from the positive, from love, and then go to fear. But in order to start love in a consistent way, you need some basic level of fear. The most basic, most primal. Just the fact you're not your own entity, you're not independent, you recognize that there's a God on top of you and he's going to tell you what to do.
Well, isn't that also to like habit? When you first start,
Yeah.
you
But how do you get a habit?
over and over and over and
So
over
that's
until at some point you don't even think about it.
But
it.
why did you start and do it over and over and over again? Either because the doctor scared you, or because your wife scared you, or your mother scared you, or whatever, or you scared yourself, right? That's how you start a habit, because you're scared your body's going to fall apart, you're scared your boss is going to fire, whatever the habit is, you're scared of something. The fear, and it doesn't have to be scared like, oh, like a monster. There's some element of fear that's propelling you, that's pushing you every day, even when you're not in the mood. And that's the basic level we need. That's the kippah. The kippah is not in the Torah, not biblical. Where do we know the kippah from? So in the Talmud, it speaks about one of the sages of the Talmud, I think of Nachman bar Yitzchak, that when he was a baby, or before he was born even, his mother went to a stargazer, or she overheard a stargazer say about her child that he's going to be a thief. So she put a kippah on his head, and she made sure he always wore the kippah. Because if his inclination will be to steal, the kippah will remind him that there's a boss, yeah, and he can't do it. And his mother would drive him crazy. Every time the kippah fell off, she'd make him put it on. It was like, and he never understood why. One day it says he was sitting under a tree, a fig tree, whatever it was, and his kippah fell off. The wind blew it off, the kippah fell off. And in that moment, he had an urge to get up and steal one of the it was obviously someone's fig tree, to steal one of the fig trees. And in that moment, he realized why his mother pushed him to have a kippah on his head. The kippah reminded him on a daily basis that he has a yoke. That was his yoke. His yoke was God tells me what to do. I don't decide myself what to do. Okay, so can I create a fear? There's even a basic level of fear. Can I create that? Oh, so I think if you've been here and learning Tanya long enough, you know the Alter Rebbe teaches us again and again that the mind controls the heart, and we can create emotions, or we can at least, even if a person has zero fear, it might be a little hard, because we said we can't change the makeup of the person. We could just change what it's focusing on. So if a person has zero fear at all, then that could be a problem for a different time. But if a person has fear, it's just not channeled in the right way. So the Alter Rebbe explains that we could change it. We could change it through meditation, through thinking. You know, the word bisimcha, like it says, you should always be bisimcha. You should always have joy when you serve God. Yeah? The word bisimcha, the letters that make up the word, if you switch them around, make up the word machshava. Thought. You want to be happy, don't turn on dancing music. It's not going to make you happy. It may make you forget what's making you sad in the moment, but it's not going to make you happy. But if you sit down and think about all the blessings in your life, and you put things truly in perspective, and you understand where you came from, where you're headed, what's going on in life, that will make you happy. And then you'll be happy, regardless of what's thrown your way. So we can create feelings. We can create these things, but we have to think. So what do we think about in order to create an awe, this basic level of awe of accepting the yoke of God? So Alter Rebbe is going to tell us in this first section of chapter 41 that we have to think about two things. First of all, we have to spend time thinking about how great God is, which means look outside or close your eyes or whatever, and just for a few minutes, you know, you have you can see a picture and then it zooms out and you see more and more and more. So imagine you're looking at a person in a picture, and then the picture zooms out and you see his whole the property he's standing on. And then it zooms out and you see the city. And then it zooms out and you see the state, and then the country, and then the globe, and then you see the whole universe, and then you see the Milky Way, the galaxy, whatever. The further out you go, the less, yeah, but the greater the view you have. think about where the tree came from, where it started from a little seed, and where the energy for that came from. Think about how great God is. What's going to happen at the end of that meditation? Let's say for 5 minutes, you think about how great God is. You don't just use those words. You use imagery to try to make God as great as possible. What's going to happen at the end of those 5 minutes? God will be great, but what will you be?
Smaller.
Very insignificant.
Yeah.
So now the question is, okay, so why should I get up and do a mitzvah? What's it going to help? You can't even find the universe in God's eye, in God's view of the universe. Even the entire universe is a speck of dust. So what am I going to accomplish? So then you have to take the meditation in the other side. Say, this great God, that to him I'm nothing, not even a speck of dust. He gave me a Torah. And he spoke to Moses to speak to Bnei Yisrael, to the Jewish people, to me, to tell me, I want you to put on tefillin. I want you to study Torah. Could you imagine that? Imagine the greatest thing in the universe, not in the universe. He's infinitely greater than the universe. And he cares about what I'm thinking now, what I'm doing now. Let's read this part of Tanya inside. Sure.
Is kippah Hebrew or Yiddish? Because you always have the other word yarmulke, which if you break it down, someone says yarmulke is actually Hebrew. Yar malka, fear of.
It's actually Aramaic. Yare Malka is the fear of the king.
Fear of the king.
Yeah.
Okay. And kippah, someone says it comes from the Yiddish keppel.
Yeah,
I don't
but
know if that's
kippah is probably because kippah is like a dome.
dome.
Like a building that has like a dome on it. It's called like a kippah.
Uh-huh.
So this is like a dome. A kippah is like a dome. It's not a flat piece of paper. Right? It's dome shaped. That's probably why it's called kippah.
Not like a cover, okay, a dome, okay. And that comes from the Hebrew?
I think it's Hebrew.
Oh, so there's no Yiddish.
Well,
I always thought the same you did.
yarmulke,
Yeah, but what's Yiddish?
yeah.
It's Hebrew and German.
It's different words from different languages that Jews use. It's a jargon. Yarmulke, right?
Okay, you say German.
And most people say yarmulke. They don't even say yarmulke,
Yeah.
right? It's like a good yontif. It's yom tov, but it's a yontif. Kinahara.
Yeah.
Kinahara. It's Cain, Ayin, Hara. It's 3 words, but it's Kinahara.
It's one word, make it.
Whatever. That's how words work. Okay.
Okay.
Page 598. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chapter 41. One must. So remember, where are we coming from? We're coming from action is the most important. Kavana, intention, are the wings. Okay. But if you want to start serving God, in other words, you've got action now, you want to start worshiping God a little. One must, however, constantly bear in mind what is the beginning of divine service, as well as its core and root. This means, although fear is the root of turn away from evil, in other words, all the negative commandments, and love is the root of do good of all positive commandments, so you need both. Nevertheless, it is not sufficient to awaken the love alone to do good and hope that the fear will come afterwards. Because, by the way, there's a mitzvah to fear God. That's a positive mitzvah. So if you love God, and that results in doing all 248 positive commandments, one of those 248 is to fear God. So then you'll fear God, and then as a result, you'll refrain from all 365 negative commandments. So you'd think it makes sense to do it this way. Alter Rebbe says not so fast. But at the very least, in other words, in principle, that's true. That's how it works. But at the very least, before performing the positive command, and this doesn't mean that if you don't get this, you shouldn't do a mitzvah. But as the basis, one must first arouse the innate fear which lies hidden in the heart of every Jew, not to rebel against the supreme King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, as has been stated above. But as has been stated above, this is at the core. And that's why when someone threatens you with something that in your mind will disconnect you from God, you're not going to allow it. You're going to give up your life for it. Even though, why is that different than eating a cheeseburger? No different. But because we've convinced ourselves that eating a cheeseburger, I'm still Jewish. Bowing down to an idol, I'm not Jewish. So therefore, I'll risk my life not to bow down to an idol. I'm not going to risk my life not to eat a cheeseburger, right? But it's because I convinced myself of that. The minute, in other words, deep down, if I convince myself that eating a cheeseburger is just as bad as worshiping idol, I'd give up my life for a cheeseburger too, right? In other words, deep down, do I love and fear God? Absolutely. But I don't feel it. It doesn't express itself day to day. So we're going to have to figure out how to take this love or this fear that is naturally ingrained in every one of our souls so that this fear should manifest itself in his heart or at least in his mind. In other words, that we should have access to it. How do we do this? So let's see. This means that in order to arouse within himself the latter category of fear, in other words, the lowest level of fear, he should at least contemplate in his mind the greatness of the blessed Ein Sof and his kingship, which extends to all worlds, both higher and lower, bearing in mind that the greater the king's dominion, the more awe it inspires in his subjects. And God is a king not just over us little people, God is a king over the angels and all the spiritual worlds too. And let him further consider that he fills all the worlds. In other words, even though God is above it all, he fills it all, animating them with an indwelling life force that created beings can experience and comprehend. And beyond that, God encompasses all worlds. In other words, he also animates them with a life force that transcends the experience and comprehension of created beings. In other words, he doesn't just manifest himself in the creation, because if he would only manifest himself in creation, he would change based on creation. Right? When an artist draws a painting, the artist changes. He's tired afterwards. If God only invests himself in creation, then he'd get tired afterwards. He would change. But no, God encompasses everything. He doesn't, he sends part of himself or a ray of his light to invest itself. The rest of him stays external, stays removed, and therefore doesn't change at all because of the world. As it is written, do I not fill heaven and earth? Yet. So that's one side of the equation. One side of the meditation, the first 5 minutes or 2 minutes or 1 minute, however long you can focus your mind, is to think about how great God is, how far removed God is from me. Not because we're pushing him away, but because we're trying to understand how great he is. Yet this great God that stands above all worlds, he leaves aside the creatures of the higher worlds and the creatures of the lower worlds, all the angels and all the spiritual things. He leaves that all aside. What does he care about? He uniquely bestows his kingship upon his people Israel in general, for God is known as King of Israel, and upon him, in other words, the person who's having this meditation in particular. For a man is obligated to say, for my sake was the world created. Yeah, in other words, it says, why did God create Adam? One. Every other animal God created male and female. Otherwise, how did they procreate? Even man, humans, God created Adam and Eve, male and female. But originally he created them stuck together and then he separated them. Why do that? Why not just create them as two people? It's not like one is older than the other. They were both created at the same time. God just divided them. So what did God gain by creating two people in one and then separating them, if he knew anyway he was going to divide them? So the Mishnah says that Adam, this androgynous human being, was created alone and then divided to teach us that it was worth creating the world for one person, and any person has the obligation to say, as the Mishnah says in Ethics of Our Fathers, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, for me the world was created. So when you're standing there and you're thinking, look at this universe in the eyes of God, I'm nothing. Yeah, God created all of this for you. You're the reason. I don't know. I don't remember which space shuttle it was, but one of the space shuttles that it blew up after it took off. Challenger, maybe.
Yeah.
So I think
when the 7 astronauts were killed.
So I think if I remember, I saw like something about it years ago. I think what caused the accident was a piece of foam that flew off the the
Part of the
ship
windshield.
and nicked, like made a hole or something, ruptured the coating or something, and that blew it up. A little piece of foam. We're talking about a billion-dollar, a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, tens of thousands of technicians, of engineers, of people that put in decades of work, spent billions of dollars on a piece of machinery that was beyond its time, and a little piece of foam that was just there for what? To protect themselves. It had no,
Yeah.
it wasn't like it wasn't a sophisticated something. A little tiny piece caused the whole thing. So the day you feel, I'm so small and insignificant, you're not insignificant. God created the whole world and it's dependent on you. What you're going to do now, say now or think now, that could be the reason God created the world. When you go to an arena to see a fight or a sport, you're going to see a sport, you're not just going to see a game, you're hoping to see a moment of the game. You're going for 4 hours or 3 hours or an hour, or whatever, but you're hoping to see a split second, a moment of the game. That's why you want to get the best seat, to see that moment close up. Yeah? God created the whole world for a moment, for a human being to do something that will tip the scale and Moshiach will come. You may be that moment. So when you spend 3 minutes meditating how great God is, and that now God took he left it all aside. Why did he create all his? He's interested in me, what I'm doing right now. And that's why it says here, he quotes in the Mishnah, right? And upon him in particular, for a man is obligated to say, for my sake was the world created. Yeah? That's an awesome responsibility. And he, for his part, accepts his kingship upon himself. In other words, I could think, okay, God is expecting me to do something. I don't care. I didn't ask to be created. No, but I know that at Sinai I accepted, and even now I'm accepting this responsibility, that he be king over him, to serve him and to do his will in all kinds of servile work. Yeah, this is the meditation. In other words, I have a yoke. The yoke of heaven is on me.
But we think of creation as a single act, but God's recreating everything continuously.
Yeah, but it's all every moment, everything is
That's what
being
I mean,
recreated.
But he's recreating every single thing.
So this moment, so 5,000 years ago, God didn't create the world for me. I wasn't even around. But right now he's creating it for me. I am around.
Right.
That's why I have to say that. If God wasn't recreating the world, then how do I know that it was me God created the world for? But right now,
the corollary to this phrase from Mishnah, Zehayom Hashem. Would you say it's similar, or it's in a different?
you're saying the verse from Hallel that we say?
Yeah, is that similar to this? You know, where we say Bishli?
Shvili Nivra Ha'olam?
Yeah. Or is it?
I don't know.
Is it technically different? I'm just
not
curious.
sure.
It just crossed my mind.
I'm not sure.
Okay, but I mean, it has the same essence.
Yeah.
You know.
Let's read a little more here. And behold, God himself stands over him, and the whole world is full only with his glory. And not only being omnipresent does he see everything, but moreover, in other words, he doesn't just see everything from the vision up there. No, he scrutinizes him in particular. God is right here watching me right now and searches his reins and heart, in other words, his innermost thoughts and emotions, to see if he is serving him as is fitting. When you think about this, therefore, he must serve him in his presence with awe and fear. In other words, not merely like one who is located in the king's domain, but moreover, like one standing before the king. Because the difference, if someone is standing in the king's palace, you're also respectful, but if you're standing in front of the king, that's a whole new level. They tell the story of a chassid that because of his business affairs, he ended up being in the Tsar's palace more than once, but I guess he never saw whatever. One time the Tsar walked in and everyone stood up. He could tell everyone was terrified. And he didn't display such terror. I mean, he was a religious Jew. He feared God. He had it up, but he wasn't afraid of the Tsar in that way. Afterwards, he was called. The Tsar wanted to see him. Now he's terrified. The Tsar for sure noticed that he wasn't as scared as everyone else. And now, who knows what's going to happen? And as he's getting close, being brought closer and closer, he's starting to shake and to tremble. And when he walked in, he was totally, his I was like, that's how you're supposed to stand in front of a king. Huh? However, there is a story speaking, and it could be mentioned at the beginning of Tanya when we spoke about the mind controlling the heart, that there's a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. His name is Moshe Velenker, and he was one of the genius mind. In Hayom Yom, it speaks about him. It says he said for 3 years we worked before we went into Yechidus for a private audience to the Rebbe for the first time, and 7 years we worked on implementing that Yechidus before we went in a second time. These are the types of people we're dealing with. Tremendous, tremendous people. So the Alter Rebbe, during the end of the Alter Rebbe's lifetime, that's when Napoleon invaded Russia, and the Alter Rebbe found himself on the side of the Russians. The Alter Rebbe was rooting for the Russians, not only rooting spiritually. The Alter Rebbe actually did things practically to help the Russian government. And although the Alter Rebbe died during his escape from the war front, but his children later, for all generations, till the Tsar, till communism, till the Bolshevik Revolution, the Rebbes of Chabad had the title an honorary citizen forever. They had special privileges because of the efforts the Alter Rebbe invested in that war. And one of them was that this chassid Moshe Velenker, he was well versed in languages, and the Alter Rebbe sent him to spy for the Russians, and he made it very high in the French command. He made it all the way that he ended up being in rooms where Napoleon was there, and he managed to foil a lot of their plots. And one day, I mean, at some point, Napoleon realized there is a traitor in his midst, there's a spy, and so he suspected a Moshe, probably because he was a Russian speaker. I don't know exactly why, but he suspected Moshe. So one day he burst into the room unexpected, ran over to Moshe Velenker, pointed at him and said, "You're a spy." And right away he put his hand on his heart to feel if his heart is pounding faster, and it wasn't. And it saved his life. And later he credited the Alter Rebbe for teaching him, for Tanya, for Chassidus, that the mind is in control of the heart. And he was able to control his heartbeat, and as a result saved his life. Okay.
Interesting.
Generally speaking, at all times of the day, you have to be aware that God is on top of you. A yoke has to be constantly felt. That's why we wear a kippah constantly. But we're not constantly thinking about God every moment. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to work. We wouldn't be able to sleep. We wouldn't be able to feed our family, right? So we have to spend sometimes that we think about intentionally like this. The rest of the day, it's sort of the effect is felt. So when I go to work, even though I'm not thinking about God, because I'm wearing the kippah, it's enough to stop me from doing the wrong thing or going to the wrong place, right? But if I don't spend time every day thinking about it, then by the time I get to 6, 7 o'clock at night, and 3 weeks since I thought about God, I'm not really going to be intentional. So Alter Rebbe says, therefore, because of how important this is, one must meditate profoundly and at length on this, in the middle of 601, one must meditate profoundly and at length on this concept according to the capacity of apprehension of his brain and thought and the time available to devote to this contemplation. This time being, when is a good time to do this, Alter Rebbe says? Before he engages in the study of Torah, or before the performance of a commandment, such as before putting on talis or tefillin. So in other words, in the morning, before you wrap your talis and tefillin, spend a few minutes. And soon Alter Rebbe is actually going to go into the details of these 2 minutes, make it special, that an opportune time to think about it. But to think about this, the fact that God is, how great God is, and the fact that this great God cares about what I'm doing now, and that will be a yoke enough that the rest of the day will be in check and in place, and I'll do what I'm supposed to do. Okay, so that's a general meditation. But then, besides a general meditation, every mitzvah has a specific thing it's accomplishing. And every mitzvah has a specific meditation that accompanies it that can help me have this kavanah, have this awe, and that will later lead to love, that will be the wings that will lift the mitzvah, right? So, for example, let's say in Judaism, there's a concept of a shliach. My title officially is a shliach, an emissary. Right? In halacha, there's a concept of shliach. an emissary, that I could do something on your behalf because you made me your emissary, and it has the legal ramifications as if you did it. As if you did it, not as if I did it. So the example, the tractate of the Talmud that speaks about the laws of shliach, of emissary, is the tractate of kiddushin, of marriage, of betrothal. What's betrothal? So there's two parts in a Jewish marriage. There's kiddushin, where you sanctify the woman. In other words, you designate her that she's not available to everyone else, she's mine, but you haven't gotten married yet. Today, we do that together under the chuppah. We give the ring and we do the chuppah at the same time. Because it used to be gave the ring, and then you had 12 months to grow up, to get a job, to get a house, to get a life, and get married. But for those 12 months, she could find someone else. So at the beginning of the 12 months, the kiddushin process was you gave her a ring. Now she's yours. You couldn't be with her. You weren't married to her. You couldn't be with her, but she also couldn't be with anyone else. So if she, for example, went willingly with someone else, that's considered adultery. If she wants to marry someone else, you have to give her a divorce, but you're not married yet. Then there is, a year later, there's the chuppah, where they go in together and become husband and wife. The problem is, 12 months, a lot can happen. The world changes, wars happen, people get lost, and then you have women that are left alone there. So that time frame dwindled. As far as 150 years ago, probably, people were still doing it a few days before, sometimes a few weeks before. Today, we do it under the chuppah. Under the chuppah, we do everything. So if someone gets engaged, it's only a formality. We actually don't give engagement rings. We give an engagement ring after the chuppah. Because giving an engagement ring has halachic ramifications that if you do the wrong thing, then it could mess things up, right? If you give an engagement ring, even if you don't, it can be problematic. So we avoid giving gifts before marriage. Any gift that's given before marriage is from the parents. The parents give a gift. So I think Steiner, my parents took her, when we got engaged, they took her and they bought her a necklace, a diamond necklace. After we got married, then I gave her an engagement, what the world calls a diamond ring. We didn't call it an engagement ring because I didn't give it to her for an engagement. I gave it to her for her wedding. But, so what happens? So it's a year apart. Let's say I'm in yeshiva. I don't want to leave to go. I have to travel somewhere to go betroth a woman. I'm not even getting married. I'm still spending a year in yeshiva or whatever. So why should I go there? So he's a business guy traveling through town. I say, listen, you're going to this in the city. This girl's there. I'm getting married to her. Do me a favor. Here's a ring. You be my emissary to betroth her to me. And then this businessman goes and he says, here's this ring. You are betrothed to Mendel with this ring. Okay, so Yankel says, you're betrothed to Mendel with this ring. I made Yankel an emissary. Now, who is this girl betrothed to? To me, even though Yankel gave him the ring. But because Yankel was my emissary, Yankel gave him the ring saying, Mendel's betrothing you. So even though I never saw her. Now, the Talmud says you shouldn't betroth a woman before you see her. Fine, let's say I saw her, I know her already, whatever, for whatever reason, I couldn't be there, okay? So, and where do we know this? We know this from the Torah, right? Avram sent Eliezer to betroth Rivka for Isaac. He did it on Isaac's behalf. So what happens? God created a world, a physical world, and he wants the physical world to become a dwelling place for God. But God isn't physical. So God created us. And God put his wisdom in the Torah. And based on his wisdom, he said, guys, you want to know? You know what I want? I want that leather should be used for tefillin. And that you should put it on every day. Now we go and do it. We're like God's emissaries in this world to accomplish what God wants us to do. What God wants to happen. He's using us as his tools, so to speak, in this world to get those things accomplished. So every mitzvah I'm doing is, where did the mitzvah come from? It came from Torah, which is God's wisdom. And in the Torah, God says, God speaks to Moses, tell the Jewish people, I want them to do this. I want them to do this. This is God's will. That's a result of his wisdom. The Torah and the mitzvahs is God's. So when I do a mitzvah with my hand is now an emissary of God. It becomes like a conduit through which God is betrothing the world through me. But because God's energy is going through me, I'm also now connected to God. What do we say in a blessing when we do a mitzvah? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddishanu. Kiddishanu means betrothed. Kiddushin is the word that we use for betrothal, for marriage, for this first step of marriage is kiddushin. Sanctified. Kadosh means separated, removed. In other words, what's betrothal? You're not my wife, but you're not available to anyone else. I'm separating you from the rest of the world. You're not mine yet, so to speak. You are, but not fully, but you're removed from the rest of the world. That's Asher Kid. God is doing the same thing to us. When we do a mitzvah, so every mitzvah you're doing, this meditation can help, again, bring into more focus this general fear of heaven. Look what's being accomplished with this mitzvah. So once at the beginning of every day is good to spend time on it, but then anytime you do a mitzvah, to think, when you say the blessing, to think about what's happening in this mitzvah. What's going on? This massive God and me, little nothing. And God wants me to be his emissary to effectuate change in this world. And that changes my whole being. It connects me to this infinite God that I can't even fathom. Let's look at that a little bit inside. 602. He should also reflect how the light of the blessed Ein Sof, which encompasses all worlds and pervades all worlds, and which is identical with the higher will, is clothed in the letters and wisdom of the Torah. Or, if his meditation takes place before he puts on his talis and tefillin, he should contemplate how the divine will is clothed in these tzitzis and tefillin, it being God's will that a Jew wear them. And through his recitation or study of the Torah, or by his wearing tzitzis and tefillin, he draws upon himself his blessed light, in other words, the blessed light of God, that is over the part of God above, his soul, which abides in his body and animates it. This he does with the intent that it may be absorbed and nullified in his blessed light. And this is why a tzaddik, we mentioned this last time, right? A tzaddik that gives a blessing, because the tzaddik does all the mitzvahs, does everything God wants, all parts of his body have been sanctified, have been betrothed to God. So now when a tzaddik blesses a Jew, whether God wanted it or not, the tzaddik's only channeling the divine energy. So the blessing will happen. Because the tzaddik is everything the tzaddik breathes is godliness. Because not only his physical actions are infused, but when we do a mitzvah, where is God penetrating? Most times it's just the physical limbs, because our mind and heart might not be there 100%. But the tzaddik whose mind and heart is there 100%, God infuses, God penetrates and encloses even his mind and heart. So he's cognizant, he's consciously connected to God. Okay, before we get to the next section, Alter Rebbe is going to take us a little further here, a little more detailed. Now we're going to discuss a little bit tefillin, talis, and tefillin. Yeah. We're not going to. We're in the second paragraph of 603, but before we get there, so you see, in the end of 601, the second to last paragraph of 601, he says one must meditate profoundly about this before at some time during the day. Yeah. Then at the top of 602, in addition, you should also think about this for every mitzvah you do. And now he's going to give us an example, even more specific in 603, the second paragraph, in tefillin and in talis, as we'll soon see. So, tefillin. What's tefillin? Tefillin is a leather box that has four pieces of parchment, or one long piece of parchment with four sections of the Torah written on it. Why these four sections? But why? Before we get to what the four sections are, what?
So the four sections that talk about the describing the tefillin.
The four times in the Torah where it says the verse ukshartam lot in one variation or another to bind it as a sign on your arm, and it should be as a remembrance with you. Only two of them have the mezuzah. That's why in the mezuzah there's only two sections, the Shema and the Vayih, because only two of them. Okay. But if we go a little deeper, there's four. Okay, so you listed Shema is one. V'ahavta is one. It's Shema and V'ahavta is one. So V'haya im Shamoa, the second paragraph of the Shema is number 2.
Okay.
Then there are two.
What about the third paragraph?
Oh, no, that's tzitzis. That's not. It doesn't say anywhere in that paragraph about mezuzah or tefillin.
Okay.
Okay.
The reason we say it as part of the Shema is because actually not because of the tzitzis.
It's not that, that's what, because you have the talus on and.
Yeah, but you don't have a talus on a night,
True, but if you were.
and women don't have a talus.
Yeah, right, if you were in Catan, then you have.
But still-
But,
No, but a lot of people don't wear a talus on a night because there's no mitzvah to wear it at night.
so I always thought that the whole purpose of saying the Vayomer, third paragraph was because when we come to the part that said, we kiss it.
Yeah, but say it before. Why is that part of the mitzvah of Shema?
Because when you.
It's
look
not.
at
So it's not part of the mitzvah
Yeah,
of Shema.
but when you should look at the tzitzis and remind yourself of the 613, right? Uritemoto.
Yeah, but why do you have to say it? Why do we say that paragraph? You're not going to get. My question isn't leading you to. I'm not trying to trick you or anything, but it's something we don't think. What's the verse right after about seeing that? Right after the tzitzis, what does the verse continue with? Yeah. No, before that. Uritemot so uzchartem. No. No, before that.
Oh, I have to go through the whole thing. I don't have to.
We speak about the Exodus of Egypt.
Oh.
There's a mitzvah to remember the Exodus of Egypt every morning and every night. So because there's a mitzvah to say the Shema every morning and every night, and everyone's going to do it, so we attach a third paragraph like this. Every time you say the Shema, you're doing the mitzvah of remembering the Exodus from Egypt. So that has nothing to do with the mitzvah of Shema. It has nothing to do with the mitzvah of tefillin or mezuzah or tzitzis. So that's why it's not on the mezuzah. It's not on the tefillin. It's part of the Shema because it helps us do another mitzvah at the same time we're doing the Shema. But that's why when we put on the tefillin, a lot of times just saying the first paragraph is technically enough. You did the mitzvah of Shema. But really, the first two paragraphs, you should say the second paragraph also. But the third paragraph technically has nothing to do with it. Now, the rabbis bundled it together. Practically, it has everything to do with it. But I'm saying originally, okay. So the first Shema and V'hayim Shema, those are two paragraphs that are in the mezuzah, and there are also two of the four paragraphs in the tefillin. But there's another two paragraphs in the book of Exodus that speak about the tefillin. One of them is when we speaks about the mitzvah of firstborn, of redeeming the firstborn, or if it's an kosher animal, slaughtering it, bringing it as a sacrifice. If it's a donkey, redeeming it, and if it's a human, redeeming it. And then it goes on afterwards to speak about when you'll come to the land, your children will ask you about the story, the Exodus of Egypt, what the mitzvahs are for, and you'll tell them the story of the Exodus, and you'll put on the mezuzah, you'll put on the tefillin as a reminder, as always.
We recite that also in the Haggadah at that point too. Also.
One of the verses there, Ki yeshacha bincha, I think is from that paragraph.
And does that come after the Haggadah?
Trying to remember if it's that verse. So it's actually in the Siddur. If you can look at it later, in the Siddur, after Aleinu in the morning prayers, you have here a section on page 82, Rabbeinu Tam's Tefillin. We put on a second pair of tefillin. We say also the three paragraphs of the Shema because it's all part of the Shema. And then we say the next two paragraphs that are in the tefillin. So the first paragraph begins, God spoke to Moses saying, consecrate to me every firstborn, every one that first opens the womb among the children of Israel, of man and of beast, it belongs to me. Okay, that's this mitzvah. Then the second paragraph begins, and when the Lord will bring you into the land of the Canaanites as he swore to you and to your fathers, and he will give it to you, you shall set apart for the Lord every offspring that first opens the womb. Okay, that a continuation of that. And then when in time to come, your son will ask you, saying, what is this? You shall say to him, with a mighty hand, the Lord brought us out of Egypt. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord every male that first opens the womb, and redeem all my firstborn sons, and it shall be as a sign on your hand and as a reminder between your eyes. Okay. So if we go through these 4 paragraphs, the Shema, the V'hayim Shemoah, Kadesh li kol b'chor is consecrate to me every firstborn, and then V'haya ki v'yach it has the words V'haya ki yisholcha bincha, when your child will ask you, what is this? So Kabbalistically, the first paragraph here, Kadesh li kol b'chor, is Chachma. Why? Because what's B'chor?
Firstborn.
The firstborn. What's the first sphere? What's the first divine attribute? Chachma. The first thing God created was Chachma.
Okay.
Then the child starts asking questions. That's the second paragraph. That's Bina, right? Because Chachma remembers the initial bolt of lightning, the thought. But then you have to develop it. You have to dissect it, and right, you tear it apart. How do you do that? Through questioning. You question and you develop it and you understand it better. That's Bina. So the second paragraph reflects Bina. Then you have Shema. What does it say in Shema? V'ahavta. That's love. That's chesed. And then you have in V'hayim Shemorah, it says, if you don't do what God says, V'chara, God will get angry at you and he'll curse stop the rain, etc. That's yira, that's fear. In other words, now, love and fear, remember, they're born in the intellect. Das is the part of the brain, the part of the intellect that has the emotions, but in intellectual form. So I know I should love God, comes before actually loving God. I'll give you an example. Let's say you learn one day that there's a dangerous snake in your area and it's poisonous. You're afraid, right? But you're not yet afraid because you haven't seen the snake yet. But you know that the minute you see it, you're going to be afraid. That's fear that's still in your head. It's in Das. Das is what gives birth, takes the Chachma and Bina and gives birth to the emotions. So Das is the emotions the way they are in the brain. In the Zohar, it says that the brain is divided into 3. There's the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere, and the back. The right hemisphere is where Chachma lies. The left hemisphere is Bina. The back is Das. If you put on tefillin, you'll notice that you have the tefillin in the front. The straps go on either side, and the back is the knot. Mm-hmm. The knot is the yud or the dalid, yeah, in the back. And then from the back comes 2 straps, one on the right and one on the left. So you have the das is in the back part of the brain. That gives birth to 2. So there's 2 straps in the front. That's Chachma and Bina. Then in the back they come into das, and then when they come down, in other words, they go out of the brain and into the heart. They divide it into 2 again, to 2 straps, Chesed and Gevura, and you'll know which strap is longer. So halachically, the right strap is supposed to be longer. They're both supposed to reach at least the middle of towards the middle of the stomach, but the right one is supposed to be longer. It doesn't matter how much longer. In other words, if the left one is here, the right one should be here. The right one should be longer. If you read the prayer, the Kabbalistic prayer that we say Friday night before davening, before you did nefesh, there's a whole long Kabbalistic prayer. In there you'll see where it speaks about chesed and gevura. It says it describes it as one longer, one shorter.
I never took the 2 and measured them to see if they're.
I knew one was longer. I didn't know which
I didn't even know that.
I never knew the reason.
And it doesn't matter if you're right or you're lefty, because right and left doesn't change. Right. Okay.
Okay.
So this is all a mystical. How it makes sense, how it works, that's not for today. What's the point? The point is that when you put on tefillin, you're drawing down the divine chachma, the divine bina, divine das, chesed, and gevura. So if you put on tefillin and you're not thinking about it, okay, you drew it down, but it stays surrounding you. But if you thought about it, and if you try to meditate, in other words, bringing the divine energy into your brain, and then you develop some sort of emotion to God, and you brought God into now the divine energy that you're saying when you put on the tefillin, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav, God is sanctifying us with His commandment. Now the sanctification is running through my veins, not in a figurative sense. Now the sanctification is in my head, is in my right, because my brain can be thinking about how I'm going to pull off the next crime. Intellect is not divine. Intellect is neutral. I could use it for divinity, or I could use it for terrible things. I can also use it for neutral things. The same thing is with my feelings. It's neutral. But if I utilize it for the mitzvah, so then the mitzvah helps my body become a physical conduit for God. Now, you don't do mitzvahs all day, but we already know in Tanya, if I go to work with the intention that I'm working because God put me on this world to have a family and to take care of them and to give tzedakah and to be able to come home later at night and eat and learn and daven, then the working is also part of this. It's all part of it. So I could live, I don't have to live as a saint in a shul studying Torah all day. I could live as a regular person in the world, and my life is filled with this divine energy. We're a little late. Should we just read a little bit inside, or should we continue next week?
Yeah, when we're talking about, yeah, so we could do that.
Okay. So specifically, Talis also, by the way, Talis, we wrap ourselves, it's also like accepting the yoke that God is in charge. It's the same type of, we'll see. Specifically through Tefillin, the second paragraph on 603. Through Tefillin, he should intend, in other words, his meditation should be that the attributes of wisdom and understanding, which are in his divine soul, should be nullified and absorbed into the attributes and wisdom and understanding of the Blessed Ein Sof, these being clothed, in particular, in the passages of Kadesh and V'hayaki V'yacha. Those are the two passages that reflect Chachma and Bina. That is to say, that he should use the wisdom and understanding that are in his soul for God alone, only in pursuit of Torah and mitzvot, and for understanding godliness. Similarly, he should intend that the attribute of das, the third of the three components of intellect in his soul, which includes both chesed, kindness, and gevurah, severity, fear and love in his heart, be nullified and absorbed into the attributes of the higher knowledge, das ha'elyon, which comprises kindness and severity, and which is clothed in the passage of Shema and V'hayim Shemoah. This accords with the statement of the Shulchan Aruch that while putting on the tefillin, one should intend to make one's heart and brain subservient to God. If you look in the Siddur, there's a paragraph before it putting on the tefillin where it says this is what you should think about when putting on the tefillin. The first paragraph on page 11, you look in the Siddur later, stand when putting on tefillin and bear in mind that God commanded us to write there's a meditation that the Shulchan Aruch says we're supposed to have while putting on the tefillin. That's what it says, to nullify the heart and the mind to God. What's the heart? Chachma and Bina. The heart, the mind, Chachma and Bina. The heart, love and fear. To nullify it to God. In other words, to give it over to God, that the yoke of heaven should be on it. It shouldn't care about or think about anything that God doesn't want it to care and think about. Quickly, let's just read the next two paragraphs. And while putting on the tzitzit, one should bear in mind that it is written in the Zohar, namely that he should draw upon himself his blessed kingdom, which is the kingdom over all worlds. Nevertheless, we should intend and endeavor to focus God's kingdom specifically over ourselves through this mitzvah. For the commandment of tzitzit is particularly effective in enhancing one's acceptance of the yoke of heaven, which is the mitzvah, right? You're wrapping yourself up in a talus. This is similar to the commandment, you shall surely set a king over yourself. Okay, we'll pause here.
Okay. So is that same?
Now, just because I want to stop the recording, you look in the Rebbe's letters, many people that ask the Rebbe how to have more intention during davening or in general advice in life, the Rebbe would tell them to think the first page of chapter 41 in Tanya every morning before davening.
Wow.
To repeat it and think about it. It's not in here, it's not the first page. In here, it's page 598 until 601. So the first 4 pages till the end of 601. Or this really the